Thank you very much, everybody. Good afternoon. It feels like it's still afternoon. It's a very lovely day to be welcoming you all to a Friday afternoon presentation at the Indian Nirañjanā Trust in May, which is not always what we do. But I'd just like to say a few brief words. My name's Cameron Petrie. Some of you have seen me before, but probably not all of you. And I'm based in the Department of Archaeology here in Cambridge, but I'm also a trustee of the Ancient Indian Nirañjanā Trust. I would like to welcome Professor M.B. Nirañjanā, who's here. She's going to be presenting to us this afternoon. I just wanted to say a few words before we start, but Professor Nirañjanā is here as a visiting scholar at Trinity College, and she's also connected to the McDonald Institute for Archaeological Research. And she is here for 3 months with her family, several of whom are here. And it's a great honor to have her. She's come to work alongside the Mapping Archaeological Heritage in South Asia project, but also to bring her wide knowledge and special skill set. She's based in Bangalore at the National Institute of Advanced Studies there, and has a very deep knowledge and wide-ranging interests in the fields of remote sensing and archaeology and cultural heritage protection, cultural heritage documentation. And as she's going to be showing us, she's worked on a number of extremely important archaeological sites in India that are very, very famous. And she has a personal passion about documenting things well and correctly, and actually trying to ensure that cultural heritage is understood in its fullest sense and managed appropriately. So you haven't come to hear me talk anymore. I'm going to stop talking now. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nirañjanā and give her the floor.
Thank you very much, Cameron, for that really very generous introduction. I'm really happy to be here, first of all, in Cambridge for this fellowship, and in the Ancient Indian Nirañjanā Trust. It's been really lovely to be here and present this work. This is my most recent study and yet to be published. It's on the way for publication. So I'm really happy to share this with all of you. So I'm going to show a few slides before I get into Bodhgaya, just for you to get used to how I see a site. I don't necessarily, I mean, I of course visit sites and see the view of sites like this, but I very most often see from above. So here is one aerial photograph of a crop, what is a crop mark, a ditch, which in the past would have been ditch when it was active. Here is a diagram to show how it would have been. And later, when it is under cultivated land, the ditch manifests itself in what we call positive crop mark or negative crop mark. So a buried moat creates an environment for crops to be more healthy, and therefore that produces a pattern on the surface, and a buried foundation creates an environment for crops to be a little stunted, and that produces a pattern on the surface following the subsurface patterns. These were first discovered in this country as a result of aerial photographs taken during World War I and II. But that may not be just a straightforward step from a fort to a crop mark. There may have been intermediate steps like this, where a site that went into was deteriorated from when it was in use. It may have been in a state like this, where the moat and the fort would have deteriorated. And you may find sites or parts of site looking like this. But this is only one morphology of many different morphologies that can happen. For instance, if a site doesn't have vegetation on top and it has soil, you may have soil marks. If a site has vegetation and the built structures are not fully removed from the surface, fully removed from the surface and subsurface, it can create a slightly different kind of mark. If it's not fully removed from the surface, you may find a series of mounds, and you may also get a large mound if there is a large amount of material left on the surface and there is agriculture happening on that. So there can be a variety of morphologies that can happen from with a site. Here is, for instance, let's take an example. Even in urban jungle like cities, one see traces of past layout which are inscribed as roads or land use patterns. A ruined, disused wall become hindrance in mobility, and people and goods move along it, creating paths which over time become roads and remains a permanent scar even in land use on scars in land use even within cities. So for instance, here you see the old crop, the fort lines of the fort and moat remain as roads. And you can see this in many big cities. Let's take, for example, Old Delhi. Red Fort is easy to find on Google Earth image like this, for instance. But Lal Killa was citadel of a much larger fort encircling Shahjahanabad, which no longer exists. But can we still see its scars? Let me cheat by overlaying the satellite image with this 19th century map of Delhi, which shows the surrounding fort. Now I hide this map, and suddenly you see where the fort lay. You can see that the roads follow the contours of the fort. Now that we have identified the extent of the fort, we can visit these locations on ground. And then we do find scattered remains amidst the settlements as well. This is how a site looks in urban area. There can be similar manifestations of sites in various kind of land surfaces. Now coming to Mahabodhi or Bodhgaya. Before I come to Bodhgaya, I just want to mention, like, for instance, in Old Delhi, I showed one old map and one satellite imagery. We can have a series of such things. We can have satellite imageries going, high resolution satellite imagery going for last 20 years. And then we can have other older historical satellite imagery going up to 50, 60 years. And we may have old maps going up to 200 years. And we may have old records like pilgrims who visited Mahābodhi and other places. We don't have graphical maps, but we may have records giving some ideas. Still, the information we have about how the land has been changing is very sparse. So we have to sort of guess how this has been changing. So coming to Bodhgaya, it's located on the western bank of river Lilajan. I'm using two terms here for the same river. One is Lilajan and Nirañjanā. Just for ease of use, I'm using the word Lilajan for the current course of the river and Nirañjanā for the historical course of the river. So it's on the western bank of river Lilajan in South Bihar, is renowned as the place where Buddha achieved enlightenment under this Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree is, the location of this Bodhi tree is believed to have been the same location as the tree under which Buddha attained his enlightenment. For nearly 2,000 years, it held a preeminent position in Asian Buddhist sacred geography. Despite its tremendous religious significance, the historical expanse of its sacred landscape remains uncertain. In Buddha's lifetime, the village where this tree was known as, the name of the village was Uruvela. Following his death, the place came to be associated with his enlightenment. And we have, the place itself has been referred to in various texts and records in the names of Sambodhi, Mahabodhi, Vajrasana, and so on. Here is an image of Bodhgaya taken in 2003. Bodhgaya is, by the way, a modern name for the settlement dating from probably last couple of centuries. So here is an image taken in 2003. Bodhgaya became World Heritage Site in 2002. So this image was taken close to when Bodhgaya became World Heritage Site. So this is the temple, and there is a dotted line showing the property of the temple, which has the temple and the temple tank. So this is what got protected as the property that has to be that got inscribed as World Heritage. Now, here is a map that Alexander Cunningham, who was the first Director General of ASI, prepared when he excavated Bodhgaya in the 19th century. So this map shows many mounds. I have just outlined these mounds in black and many water bodies. Now, if I just pick up those mounds and water bodies and overlay on this image of 2003, several of those mounds were still visible in 2003. Now, I just keep your eyes on the screen to when I move the image to 2018. So you will see how the landscape has changed between 2003, close to when it was inscribed as World Heritage, and 2018. So in 1.5 decades, the landscape of Mahabodhi is very much urbanized. And so when a site becomes UNESCO World Heritage, then it attracts a lot of footfall, and there is development to cater to that footfall. And this is what happens. So ideally, when it was made UNESCO World Heritage, remote sensing, that a satellite imagery should have been used, and we should have identified all these mounds, and the boundary for protection should have included all those mounds. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. So here is then and now images of 2002 versus 2018 with the mounds that Cunningham marked. I will come back to Cunningham's maps later. Cunningham explored the western bank of the river Lilajan, which is there. And he also used the translation of Xuanzang's Datang Xiuqi, which is Xuanzang's record of the Western world from Tang Dynasty. And he was very keen to pinpoint everything that Xuanzang recorded, and he thinks he found. So this is something I did some years ago. And more recently, I was like, this is not a great story to say there was something that Cunningham found 100 years ago and we've lost all of it. And I wanted to see whether can we find more? Is there anything left, and can we find more? So when I took up this work more recently, I wanted to understand what is that happened in this landscape that was memorialized or built, and what can we find out? So that led me to look at why is this landscape, not why is this landscape important, but more what was all there in this landscape. So let me tell you a story about what happened here. So Buddha is believed, or Bodhisattva is believed to have arrived in Uruvela on the western bank of river Nirañjanā, and he practiced stringent austerities for 6 years, and then realized this was not, this particular event of his life, when he really became skeletal after really following the stringent austerities, is recorded in many sculptures around the Buddhist world. So here is one example of that. And he realizes that this is not the way to attain enlightenment. He proceeds and has a bath in the river Nirañjanā and meets Sujata, who gives him milk gruel. And he takes that milk gruel and sets out to find the place where he's hopefully going to attain enlightenment. And he goes to a cave called, which was later called Mahābodhi, and it is identified with this hill on the north east of Bodhgaya. And he the earth shakes when he tries to sit down, and he hears a voice saying, this is not the place where you're going to attain enlightenment. You have to go so many, I mean, this is repeating from what Xuanzang records, that you have to go so many miles southwest, where there is a tree, and that's where all the present, past, and future Buddhas will attain enlightenment. So he then sets off towards that direction that he was told, to find this tree. On the way, various things happen to him. He meets a blind Naga and he also encounters King Mara, who tries to stop him to reach this place. And these are also recorded in sculptures and sculptures in different places in Buddhist world. And he meets a grass cutter who offers him a bundle of grass, which he uses as his seat. Then there is an event that a flock of birds flies over his head, and he thinks that's a good omen. And finally, he reaches the tree. He sits down and under this tree, and this location is identified as the location where we have the tree and the shrine of Mahābodhi, which we can see today. So following his enlightenment, he's believed to have spent 7 weeks in this landscape. First week under the Bodhi tree, second week nearby, looking at the Bodhi tree with unblinking eyes, and third week in a jewel house nearby Bodhi tree, and then and so on. Third week, another week walking up and down. On the fifth week, sitting under a Grodha tree, where he's tempted by Mara's daughters, and sixth week he's protected when he's sitting in meditation. There is a heavy rain and flood, and the Muchilinda serpent actually protects him, which is also recorded in as sculptures. And the last week, when he's sitting under Rajayatana tree, two merchants offer him food, which he accepts, and then he sets out to go to Kashi, where he gives his first sermon, and he's known to have come back to Bodhgaya. And there are other things that happen here. For instance, and he performs some miracles, like 4 gods from 4 different directions offer him food in bowls of silver, gold, and so on, and he turns them into stone, and he uses. And then there is another event famous, where he walks on the Nirañjanā river. Here it is represented in an iconic form. So there are several events. These are only few that I've selected. There are about some 30-40 events that happened in this landscape. We know of these events from inscriptional sources. Here is, for instance, a list of the 7 weeks post-enlightenment. But the events themselves don't leave marks. Like how I showed you the diagram, if there was a fort or a wall, it creates scars on the ground. But events themselves, unless something was built, the events themselves don't leave these scars. We know from sculptural sources that there were memorialization of various of these locations. For instance, here, this is the Bodhi tree and the shrine around Bodhi tree. There are other sculptures which also shows the shrine around Bodhi tree at different time. So this is as far as the Bodhi tree and the shrine around Bodhi tree is concerned. And we know of this place. This was how the place looked when 19th century explorers like Buchanan and Cunningham got to this place and then explored, excavated and also conserved the Mahabodhi temple itself. So on this side is on the left, on the right side, left side is a picture of how it looks now. But from the records of people who visited the site, Faxian, Xuanzang, Yijing, and mainly Xuanzang, we know that it was not only Bodhi tree. Several of these locations connected to various of the events that happened here were also memorialized. In fact, Xuanzang's records, because Xuanzang gives the most detailed record. Here is a excerpt from a page from a translation that Max Deeg has done. Max Deeg's translation is not yet published, but here is an excerpt of a few lines of Xuanzang's records where he starts when he enters Mahabodhi. So what Xuanzang says, he mentioned places, I mean, in the sense, various features in the landscape. Like, for instance, before the enlightenment mountain, that is Bodhi mountain, he mentions Bodhi tree, wall around Bodhi tree, brick wall, main gate, Nirañjanā river, south gate. So these are all various features that he mentions. And he mentions a large number of stūpas in this region. So apart from these features, he also mentions some size or shape or distances. So he says it is narrow from here. It's he talks about a wall which is narrow north-south and wider east-west, and he gives some distances, for instance, 500 paces, size, and so on. He also gives directions. Something is east of something, south of something, but he's not always consistent. He doesn't give all these for every feature he talks. Sometimes he just says next to something without mentioning which direction. So there are 3 translations of Xuanzang, one by Beale in 1888, one by Rongxi in 1996, and one by Deeg, which is yet unpublished. So I've looked at all these 3 and I've tabulated, separating every feature that Xuanzang talks about and given these IDs for every feature. So the Bodhi hill is X1, Xuanzang 1, and the wall surrounding the Mahabodhi temple X2, and so on. So I've given the IDs for every feature that Xuanzang mentions. And why I looked at 3 translations, there are some nuances and differences. For instance, Max Deeg is the only one who mentions that there was an outer wall apart from the wall surrounding the temple. So that's an important input. And also consistently something that Beale mentions as vihara, Rongxi calls it shrine, and Max Deeg calls it temple. So when I'm looking for a feature on the landscape, these 3 are of different shapes. So, but I'm trying to crowdsource and trying to see how each all information I can gather. So Max Deeg's translation has been most useful because he has a very long commentary. He actually contextualized all records that are available, whether through translation or historical and so on. So usually looking at his work, I can I know what else is available textually for this purpose. So like this, I listed all the features Xuanzang has seen in this landscape, and there are total 62. And so when you think of Xuanzang saw 62 features on this landscape, and they were not dots on the landscape. They were stūpas, or they were water bodies. So there is one stūpa on the site, which I'll come to in a minute. Let me finish with this. So what I did, I used Xuanzang's records to make, since like in Delhi, we had a map which we could use. Here we don't have a map. So I thought, let me make a map of Xuanzang's records. So here is, for instance, the first 10 or so. I start with Bodhi hill, X1, and then the brick wall around the Mahabodhi, then the eastern gate facing Nirañjanā river, the southern gate facing a water pool, the northern gate facing the monastery. So looking at his records, I tried making a map of the landscape that Xuanzang would have seen, and I came up with a map looking like this. So here, something to notice, that there are lots of features between between the tree, which is here, and Nirañjanā river. And there are lots of stūpas. And we know one of the stūpa, I'll show you a picture of, and its diameter is about 15 meters. So if you consider that as a kind of space between the tree and the river, we'll see now actually on ground what we have. So anyway, so Xuanzang came into Mahabodhi from northeast, and he went out to southeast. He also saw some features on the other side of the river, and he goes further, and we know of the locations that he came from, and then he goes to after Mahabodhi. So on the ground, we have the Mahabodhi temple, which is here. The tree itself is here, and the shrine next to tree is here. And this is the temple complex. And this is the water body tank attached to temple complex. The river itself is flowing when it has water northward. And there are these three clusters that are known. One is the temple complex, including the water body. And here is a mound called Taradih, which was excavated. And here is a stūpa called Sujata Kuti, which is on the other side of the river as the river is flowing now. Let's look at some ground photos of all these. So this is the Taradih mound, which was excavated in the last few decades, and how it looks now when we visit. And this is Sujata Stupa. And this is, as you can see, the human scale, with the human scale there. It has a diameter of 50 meters, so it's huge. So this is only one of the stupas that may have been in the landscape. But it has confused a lot of people who worked on the site, because it's on the other side of the river, not on the same side of the river. But here, you have a scale here. The distance between the current river and the Mahabodhi complex is about 250 meters. And as my previous sketch shows, there were, according to Xuanzang, a large number of features. So this is just not enough for fitting in all those features. So, and therefore my towards the end, I have considered whether the river itself has moved closer. I'll come to it in a minute. Let's start exploring the immediate landscape, and we will start going across the river as well. So here is the temple complex. I'm not going to speak much about what is inside the temple complex. That's the most famous thing, and it was excavated and started to be excavated in the 19th century and so on. Let's start looking at what's outside. So coming back to, this is the temple complex here, and this is the north side of the temple complex. Here I bring back Cunningham's map again, and which shows the temple complex. And Cunningham actually excavated the floor plan of a monastery north of this temple complex. And after Cunningham, nobody has explored it. So I tried to identify this extent on the satellite imagery, and I was able to find a square in, if I follow the boundary between properties over there. So there is a eye hospital here, and there's a school here, and there is a road here, and there is a burial ground here. So if you follow the fences of these, you do get a square. And this is a ground photo of looking from north. I've taken this picture from here, and I'm looking towards the south, and you can see the spire of the Mahabodhi here. So this is that land. But yeah, and this is the southern end of that piece of land. And you can also see how the current compound wall is sitting on a ridge, which probably has remains of the old wall, which would have been part of wall of that monastery. Another interesting point, this is the floor plan of the monastery that Cunningham excavated. And in that, he records a well at this point. Okay, and we found a well at this point. So, and when we visited on ground, we found an old well, which is not in use, and which is a new well, which is in use. So possibly this was the well that Cunningham marked here. And maybe if we excavate today around this well, we may be able to find this monastery. So that was as far as immediate vicinity or the immediate north of the temple complex. Let's look beyond this. I bring back Cunningham's map once again, and to highlight that his exploration mainly was on the western bank of river Nirañjanā, and you will see all these markings A, B, C, D. You'll see a whole lot here, H, L, M, and a few more here. So these are all he was connecting it to. This is what Xuanzang saw here. This is what Xuanzang. He was connecting it to that, and that has been criticized a lot, that he was sort of trying too hard to sort of connect everything with Xuanzang's record. But apart from that, he did a great deal in mapping archaeological sites. We don't have a record of the landscape of Bodhgaya, but for his mapping of the mounds and so on. So anyway, so let's, so he marked these mounds. And I just overlaid it to show that we don't really easily see these mounds in most recent satellite image. Here is a drawing that Francis Buchanan, who came earlier in 19th century, who visited this site. And this is an unpublished drawing. Francis Buchanan did a survey in South India, which got published. He did a survey of Bengal and Bihar, which didn't get published. What we have is his daily journal, and he made these kind of drawings in his journal. The text of his journal has got published again and again, but the drawings never got published. So this is in British Library, and I got a reference of this and was trying to get a scan of this drawing, and my order got was just before British Library went into this huge problem, and I was stuck, and I really I knew Buchanan had made a drawing, and I really couldn't not see that drawing before completing my paper. So very kindly, Hilary Smith, who's probably online, who's also a life member of the trust, who lives in London, offered to go and take a picture and send it to me. And she did that, and that's here. So Buchanan records the temple, and he records a rectangular space, terraces around the temple, and he records a huge complex on the north, which had, and in his textual records, he mentions dimensions of this complex, although his drawing itself is not very much to scale, but he mentions dimensions. And he also mentions this complex had a wall. It was a walled complex, and it had moat on the north, on the west, and the south. So these are inputs we have from the past records. But as I said, we don't see these patterns on the satellite imagery as the images. I mean, the recent images. This is from 2022. So what do? We look for other kind of images. For instance, here is a health height map. It is called digital elevation model. So here is a key on the side. You will see the red colors are higher areas and the blue colors are lower areas. And you also have these features that I've already introduced you to: the temple itself, the temple tank, Taradih Mount, and the Sujata stūpa marked here. Now, bringing Xuanzang's map back, you see he talks about a rectangular enclosure wall around this complex, which is not the wall that we currently have. And he also mentions that it was narrow north-south and wider east-west. And he gives some dimensions. So we see a rectangular raised ridge around this temple complex. And this is not visible in normal satellite imagery. It's only visible in the digital elevation model. So that's one thing. On the other side of the river, we have one stupa here, but you also see there are several high points in the elevation, and the high points are in a straight north-south line. So if I mark all these high points, just to remind what this stupa is here, and then if I mark all these high points, I get a pattern of a sequence of high points at in a sort of aligned in the north-south direction. And here I have also marked this rectangular point here. So we did visit these places. In at least one of them, there was still a mound. Others were built over, but still, obviously, when we take a elevation model, we can see that difference. And there was another mound which I hadn't marked, but when I went on ground, we found there was a mound in the middle of a settlement over there. There is a school on top of the mound. And the local villagers told me that people gathered when there was a flood. This mound really stood out, and people gathered there until the flood waters had receded. So so this is from the ground. Okay, so going back to a satellite image, as you can see, just only the image or only the modern image may not give us all that we want to see. You also notice that the settlement here itself is along that high mound area. So in flood-prone region, very often settlements grow on big mounds because they are like safe haven in a flood-prone area. So now I go a little further, zoom out. I have marked all the features that I've already spoken about. Now I come to an image of 1975. Here you see the temple itself, but you can also see some other features. You can see a wall, kind of, and something that's surrounding a wall. Here, remains of a wall. So all these enclosures are actually addressing the temple. So they're not there simply they're not there random, but they're addressing the temple, and they don't belong to a modern function over there. So they were all remains of a past enclosure at different times, and they're all addressing the temple itself. So these are on this side. And on the other side, we see a very interesting shape, rectangle. It is squarish almost, a rectangular shape here. And it's like an embankment. It's like corners of a maybe large water body. So I'll again come back to each one of them. I mark these as well now. So you see these are outlined. These walls are outlined as well. And just bringing in the current or more recent image to show where these features are. And you will see this corner. I'll just go back 1 minute. And here, this corner looks like almost like a bastion, and which is here in the current situation. There is a ground, a playground in this corner. So when we visited on ground, we actually see the buried remains of that corner, a bastion-like corner in that place. Not only that, when we go on the outside of this playground, which has a wall here, it has this is the current wall of the playground, but under it is a older wall, which has older ancient bricks that's just peeping out over there. And on the southern side, it is actually very much overbuilt. But now that we know where the wall should have been, using GPS, we can actually visit along this whole part. And in some portions, we do find buried remains of wall as well. Again, I'm only showing pictures where we found something. I'm not showing pictures of where we didn't find, where it was built over. Now I zoom out a little bit more. Okay, first I'll go back a little bit more. 1965. You can see again the outlines are much better, and you see there is this region is lighter in color and surrounded by a slightly darker shade, which indicates a moat around this wall. So bringing back again Buchanan's diagram, where he did record a moat surrounding this enclosed wall area. also brings something interesting at this point. I'm bringing in just this region, that is the temple up to the river. So the temple has a axial path, which is just leading from the entrance of the temple till about 15 meters. If I use Buchanan's records, I find when Buchanan visited in 1812, he was able to see a longer axial path. And we find there is a Burmese pavilion here, which is inside a compound wall of the Mahant there. But the Burmese pavilion has an inscription, and these pavilions are believed to be built probably during one of the Burmese restorations that happened over there. And this Professor Upinder Singh has suggested that these were built probably during King Mindon's time. But what I want to show is what is not known is its alignment to the main temple. So unless we see it on a satellite imagery like that. So I went and sat in front of this Burmese temple and tried to use a telephoto lens, and you can see how this is aligned to the main temple. So I feel the location for these Burmese temple were also chosen because there was an axial path in this place. So if you remember, the map that I made of Xuanzang's record showed an axial path leading up to the river. So probably there was this axial path going up to the river. And we want to see whether it was this is the Xuanzang's map, which shows, I mean, he refers to this axial path several times. And if I continue that axial path or the axial line across the river to the other side, I find that it bisects this water body into half. So this water body was aligned to the temple itself. And this raises another question. How was this alignment achieved? It's not as though, because the river itself is about 650 meters wide. It's not as though in the past they didn't achieve straight lines across great distances. But of course, doing that becomes more complicated if there was a water body in between. So now let's explore whether there was a water body or what if it wasn't there. One second. This is again going a little larger area, because apart from this moat surrounding the northern enclosure, we find there was a whole series of either this portion is an extension of this moat and a series of water body, again aligned with this extension, almost as though they were maybe leftovers of a moat itself, or maybe a series of water body there. So we get these kind, and even on the south, we have other enclosures that we can pick up from satellite imagery, giving a much larger picture. Going on ground, in this area where there is an extension of this water body, of course, when we have identified and we know where it is, we can visit on ground, for instance, this location. On a current satellite or recent satellite imagery, we don't get the connection with the temple at all. But we visit, we do find the remnants of these moats. Here is another complex close to what I mentioned, this rectangular water body. You can see it close to here, very much aligned to cardinal directions and aligned, of course, to the temple itself. These are some Hindu temple and Sujata, what is sort of enshrined as Sujata temple, and a water body here, a small water body here, which was leftover of the larger water body, and a complex of more crop marks and field boundary features. These look almost like maybe remnants of 3 stūpas that were close to each other, circular features. And here is a large circular feature, which when we visit on ground, we do find a large mound, circular mound, and we also found wells along these patterns. And on this side, there is a place which is called as Dharmaranya, where Hindus go for performing Shraddha rituals, but it also has Buddhist remains and sculptures over there. So now we have all, if I put all these features that I've been able to identify in the larger landscape, make a map of this, you will see this is river Lilajan, this is another river, Mohana. Both these rivers confluence a few kilometers further north. But it's also very curious about the distribution of these features, and it's not only distribution, but their alignment to the temple itself. So now, if I then I wondered whether the river was here at all in the past. So when I take this distribution of these features and put it on a geomorphology map. This is a map that I got from Geological Survey of India. This is not a map I prepared, but I downloaded and just overlaid my features in a larger regional setting. So in a geomorphology map, the region, what happened? Yeah. So the region between these two rivers is marked as active floodplain, which means the river can move within that floodplain. So, and I also analyzed a whole lot of past maps and satellite imagery, which showed that the region in between these two rivers are very regularly flooded. And therefore, I have suggested that the river in the past probably had a course like this, where it turned further east, south of Bodhgaya, and was flowing along what the river Mohana here. So the Nirañjanā itself was flowing like this, and there was no river here at that time. And this whole area was the larger complex of Bodhgaya. Mohana itself could have had a course like this, confluencing with Nirañjanā further south, or confluencing further north. It could have had either of those courses, or may have had both at different times. So my major finding is Bodhgaya itself, apart from that, there are so many features that were part of Bodhgaya. The whole thing was one large complex, and the whole thing was in the west of the old course of river Nirañjanā, which would have been along this place. Now, coming back to Xuanzang's, the map made using Xuanzang's records, and the map with all the features that we have been able to identify. Of course, I can't connect one to one, but some patterns emerge, especially on the western bank of the old course of Nirañjanā. There is a large water body with some features, and there also there is a large water body. There is one cluster of features, and there are two clusters of features over there. So maybe when we consider the whole area, including either sides of the river, we can start making some connections with what Xuanzang saw on this landscape when he visited in the 7th century. So bringing this into context, as I said, there are only 3 known features so far. By known, I mean features that have been studied and recorded: the temple complex, the Taradih mound, and the Sujata stūpa. If you put them in context, you will see how big actually the site itself must have been. In summary, the larger archaeological footprint of the sacred site of Mahabodhi extended approximately 750 meters west, 1.4 kilometers south, 2 kilometers north, and 2 kilometers east from the current boundaries of Mahabodhi temple. Historically, the river Nirañjanā may have confluenced with Mohana south of the present-day confluence. In this scenario, the downstream stretch, that is north of the confluence, would be referred to as Nirañjanā. That's why all the records have the name Nirañjanā. Consequently, the single river Nirañjanā was positioned to the east of Mahābodhi, roughly aligning with the current course of Mohana. This analysis suggests that features presently separated by the Lilajan were likely situated on the same and west side of the ancient Nirañjanā river, particularly during Xuanzang's visit. Therefore, our study contends that the sacred landscape of Mahabodhi historically encompassed all these features on the same west side of ancient course of river Nirañjanā. The current course of the river Lilajan, as I said, I use Lilajan for the current course, has not only bisected the larger sacred landscape of Bodhgaya, dividing the site into two, but also has inundated several structures and potentially settlements within the 650 meters width of the Lilajan adjacent to Bodhgaya, and which is highly potential for GPR surveys. So if you can see how dense the settlement of the sacred landscape here is and how dense here is. So it is quite possible there were remains here also which has been inundated by the river. So I come to the end of my talk. This is a picture of my institute where I conduct my research. I would like to thank the Trust for giving me this opportunity, but I also want to thank my collaborator and co-author for the paper, Sanjukta Datta. She's a historian working at Ashoka University, and Max D, who has shared his work, unpublished work. And not only that, he's been so wonderful. I can actually ask him to go back to some verses and say, can you think whether Xuanzang really said this or could he have said that? So it's been wonderful to have him as a collaborator. And I thank all of you for coming today, and I'll be happy to answer some.
Excellent. That was extremely interesting and very provocative and challenging. And there's lots of questions that are just sitting there waiting to be asked about what happens next and all sorts of other elements. I have questions that I would be interested in asking if we need to fill in any gaps. If anybody who's online would like to ask a question, can you please type it into the chat and I will read it out. But it would be easiest to start with.
Shall I stop sharing?
I think you can stop sharing. Oh, okay. Yeah, stop sharing is fine. And then we can leave the lovely photograph on the end.
Yeah.
I don't really want to ask how old that tree is, but anyway. Please.
Thank you very much. Very engaging talk. My question to you is, you've done a lot of research, and I'm guessing as a private scholar, when does your research intersect with archaeological survey, and when can excavations really happen, and how would they happen? Because it is so exciting, and I'm sure as a scholar yourself, you'd be very excited to move in that direction. But what all has to happen for that to happen?
This kind of thing is applicable to many sites, and it differs from probably state to state. How state government has to become interested if identification of land and all becomes an issue. So Bihar in that way has been very interested and very keen. In fact, I presented this work last May in Patna. There was a conference. They have the Bihar Heritage Development Society has a project with Cardiff University with Max D, a project called Xuanzang's Trail, because there are so many sites in Bihar that Xuanzang visited and so on. So I presented, and the then Secretary of Culture in the state was very interested and said, we will take this further and we'll do some excavations. But that hasn't happened because people change and it takes time. So my concern is, even if excavation doesn't happen, in the next 20 years, it's fine. But I hope the land use won't be changed into building a hotel or widening the road, or, you know. So I think the importance is to put down, hopefully, regulations of, you know, the speed at which the land use changes. So excavation itself, I mean, if it has got preserved for so many centuries, in spite of the landscape being so, you saw how much urbanization has happened in the last 2 decades. So I think excavations can wait, but it's more regulating the land use changes over there.
Robert, you got it there.
Yes, thank you very much. First, looking at the larger wall, which you delineated, and I was just thinking it looks urban. And I'm wondering whether you have any comments on that, particularly because there's a very obscure passage in Dharma Swamin which may or may indicate that Bodhgaya was in the early medieval period was a royal centre. So, and you've got quite a number of tanks, etc. I know that you've got a number of tanks in Nirañjanā that you've picked out. But yes, I just wonder whether there could be some sort of urban complex around the temple at some stage.
Yes, in fact, Buchanan, when he visited in 1812, he, in fact, this walled space, he calls it Rajasthan. So it could be. And again, Dharma Swamin's records, I mean, if you compare Dharma Swamin's Xuanzang's and Fahian's, they also talk about larger number of monasteries on the north. So it's possible the enclosure that we see now, it doesn't go that far back, but I think it mainly shows that there were repeated enclosures built at different times, possibly. But I think this definitely, what we see in the old image is definitely what Buchanan saw.
Following up on that, I think that's very compelling.
Yeah, this is the immediate wall. I think what he was talking was the next level of the wall around. Yeah. So it is possible that there were other things that came up, but the monastery itself is very what Cunningham excavated, and the square feature, which is in an earlier slide. Sorry, I hope.
It's not Nirañjanā's monastery, is it?
Well, we don't know. It doesn't know, because he talks about this 3 courts. We don't see 3. He talks about. I think Fahian talks about 3 and Xuanzang talks about 8 or something like that. So it doesn't go with his description. But what it does is it has a very with Cunningham's map as well, gives a very Pala kind of shape to it. But we don't know. I mean, this is something as shapes I can identify, but to really connect it with something, more excavations have to be done in that place. But what is wonderful is it's there, so close to the temple, and it's an eye hospital on one side and a school on one side, government lands. So it's just waiting. And we know, I mean, Cunningham has excavated and confirmed some things. We know something is there, or at least I know something is there. And I've identified the location that Cunningham has identified, and hopefully this is what I proposed as the place that has to be first cordoned off for any development, because otherwise it's such a prime location. I mean, if somebody wanted to put a modern monastery, this was, you can see the temple and so on. So hopefully this land.
Thank you, Rajni. You mentioned both Buddhist and Hindu historical structures at this place, and I was wondering if, if you could elaborate a bit more, maybe on the role of water related structures, for Hindu temples, water tanks and carts for as holy bathing places.
Yeah.
Is there something similar in Buddhism?
Okay. Gaya is a very important Hindu place. It's not very far from Bodhgaya. And Gaya was already there when this whole setup started happening. And after the place went into disuse, although the temple itself was always there. This was not like Nalanda where people forgot that it was Nalanda and it had to be rediscovered. This place was always known. But all the peripheries started, deteriorating and not much happening over there and so on. But there is a very big Hindu presence. For instance, this, you can't see this. This compound wall is what is called Mahant's Mutt. This is the Shaivite Dasnami Mahants came and settled here somewhere in 16th century, and they have this presence and a lot of work. I mean, I shouldn't be speaking too much about this because a lot of work has been done about how this whole area, in fact, a lot of land even now is owned by Hindus in this region. And there are several centers on this side, including the temple itself. The temple is also considered to be one of the places where Hindus go and do Shraddha. I mean, the Buddhist, the Mahabodhi temple, if you go there, there'll be a corner where the Hindus are performing Shraddha. So there are about something like 22 places around Gaya where Hindus are supposed to go and perform Shraddha. So the temple is one, and a few of the other features that I showed on the other side of the river is one. So there is both happening there. So I wouldn't want to speak more about it, but it's not like how we have temples and temple tanks. It is more spaces. There are some temples as well on the other side of the river, but the earlier features are the Buddhist features in this picture.
That something that was very interesting about what you were talking about almost is that chronological layering in the landscape, and you get it's like the palimpsest. It keeps building up over time. It's extremely
the textual records of Buddha, and even those locations I said, Buddha being caught in a flood and somebody went to protect. There are references to how he had issues with the Hindus of Gaya, and he preached, and they became not so aggressive and things like that. So they have lived in a way all along. But actually, within this landscape, it is post-15th century. I mean, within this immediate landscape.
Getting on, we have.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, so interesting that you've taken so different threads and brought them all together. So it's amazing to create such a fantastic picture, which I can imagine. But just want to know, who is overall in charge of the monastery to make sure it's functioning correctly, and who's using it?
So Mahabodhi, there is a Mahabodhi temple. I forget the exact word. It's the Mahabodhi Temple Trust or association or management committee, and it has Sri Lankan representation, Hindu representation, local Hindu. So that's what manages the temple. It's not an ASI site. ASI doesn't have the site. This is one site which doesn't. He I'm not sure. He does visit, and when he visits, there is a lot of excitement in the region. But it's very interesting. I wish someday I can have a chat with him, because because there is a story connected to the site on the other side of the river. I said Dharmaranyam, where there is Shraddha happening. He, I believe, visited that site. I mean, the priest there told me that he visited the site, and he said this is where this event happened, among the so many events I said. And I was like, and I thought it was a story made up by the priest. And later, when I was looking at Xuanzang's record, my location also came close to that. And I was like, what was the source Dalai Lama had when he said that this is where this happened? So yes, but the management of the temple itself, they have a management committee which has an office over there. In fact, this, I think, is their office here.
There's a few messages that have come through. I'll try and get through them quickly. One of them is a little bit about the chronology. So you mentioned Fahian, Xuanzang. Are there later, there's a comment, I'm not entirely sure how to interpret it, but what I think it's what developments after Xuanzang are present?
Actually,
visible.
Actually, Bodhgaya is full of inscription of people who came and visited and left an inscription saying so and so came or so and so was sent and things like that. So there are plenty of these, and there is also a reference to the last abbot in 15th century and things like that. So there is a lot of references, but it was more activities in the religious activities there. Why I picked Xuanzang is he gives an idea of landscape. So no other record really gives that. I mean, where he says this structure, that structure, next to it, north of it, south of it, and so on. No other, even Fahian gives very little. He mentions very few structures. I'm not talking about the activities or the teachings or the the religion or Buddha. I'm not talking about that, but physical features in the landscape. Xuanzang gives the most extensive record, so that therefore he becomes important. Many people have been and have left inscriptions, but they don't give us idea about the spread.
So there's a question from Afifa Khan, who so she says, apologies if some of this was mentioned, but she's asking about the high points that are visible on the digital elevation model and wondering how they might be related to old embankments of the river, and whether they might be is one of the part of the questions. And the second part of the question is how many of the Xuanzang sites are not visible
I have actually, I haven't, thanks. I'll just mention about the dam because I don't know if it is still connected to, this is the riverbank. And this is the rectangle. I mean, it's interesting because it has a rectangular shape, and the temple is very symmetrically positioned within that rectangular shape. The riverbank itself is this one, the current riverbank. So it's not really the riverbank. What was the second question?
About the number of features identified.
Yeah. So I haven't actually ventured into connecting one-to-one, although actually I have, but not, I'm doing, maybe next lecture. So I have been mentioning about this Sujata stūpa, which is here. How do we know it is Sujata stūpa? Is that because if there were many stupas, it could have been any stupa. So there was an inscription found here during excavation which says that this stupa dedicated to Sujata was in the time of Nirañjanā and so on. Some renovation happened during, because Nirañjanā itself is post-dating Xuanzang. So some renovation was done here and so on. So because there was an inscription identifying that stupa, we can connect it to that. So I I can find all these features, but I can't connect it to a specific one unless there is some feature like that. I may be able to connect this rectangular feature because this is a very distinct shape of the features that Xuanzang has mentioned, because distinct shape and position. But otherwise, it's very difficult to connect, because he gives, this is where he had a bath, this is where he walked, this is where he sat, this is where he washed his clothes. There's a whole lot of so unless there is because if they were built for those purpose, maybe there would have been inscriptions. So unless there is something like that found, it is almost impossible to connect one to one. But what I have tried to do here is more as a cluster. There are 3 clusters in Xuanzang's map, and there's 3 clusters we can find on ground. So possibly that connects.
Does appear to be tanks on the other side of the river, which line up with the other ones on the other side.
Probably.
Time for one last question.
Just a continuation of that. Does Xuanzang not talk about the river at all?
He does.
No, does he talk about the distance?
Yeah, he doesn't. For instance, there is this feature, 50x55. 5 is a cave of a blind Naga, he says. And he says that is, I forget the exact, something like 2 miles. I mean, this is the Chinese miles. I forget the exact 2 or 1.5, or it's li away. So that's much, it's not as far as this, but it's much beyond the river. So he doesn't say beyond the river. He says, although, for instance, he comes from Mahābodhi to this, so that he talks about, he would have crossed the river, because he comes and talks about this wall, and that east gate faces, east is the main gate and faces the river, he says. So there's a river that this gate faces, and he talks about a whole lot of things, including this one, which he places some, I forget the exact, but 1.5 or 2 miles or something like that, or 3. So at least we infer that the river was not that far. I mean, the river was beyond that.
I think we're pushing well into the time, and thank you, everyone. There's been everyone saying thank you, and online, thank you for the interesting talk, thank you for the critical presentation, and I think that basically presages what everyone else in the room is going to say. So I'd just like to ask everyone to offer a round of applause, and thank you very much for speaking.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.